Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the next episode of my Safe Bet Show, and it's a great privilege and also gives me a lot of pleasure to welcome Valerie Spicer, founding partner at Trilogy Group Partners, to the show. Thanks for coming.
Oh, well, thank you, Martin. It's great to be with you.
Wonderful. Oh, because these days, as the audience knows, I live in the States, so I should rather be saying awesome, and it is awesome. Let me delve right into tribal gaming, because that's one of the many things Valerie is famous for. Because you indeed had, or you already still having, an illustrious career in the US tribal space. And we will be delving into individual ventures that you have been involved with. But as the podcast tends to have global kind of audience, would you perhaps mind walking us through the basics of tribal gaming for those few who may not be that well versed in it?
Absolutely. You know, tribal gaming came about ages ago. Actually, before the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act, tribes were operating bingo parlors and on a social level. And as they expanded in that effort, attention came onto that, and the federal government got involved and decided to create what is known as the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act. For many, they feel like that launched the capability of tribes to engage in gaming. Many will say that it actually inhibited their sovereign right as tribes, but it created a framework from which to move forward. You know, the intriguing thing for me, and will always be, is that it was a phenomenon that allowed for economic opportunity in places where it never existed before. And I think if, you would have asked tribes, would gaming be your economic future, they probably would have said, no, I don't know what you're talking about. But it ended up being that. And I'm very proud to see and say that it has been a catalyst for a lot of positive and wonderful growth and opportunity for tribes here in the States.
Thanks for that. I would, of course, hate to put you on the spot, but I've had some dealings with the tribes already, the First Nations north of the US border up in Canada. So, and this will demonstrate my ignorance. So it comes, what you've just said comes as somewhat surprising. The fact that gambling may or may not have necessarily been ingrained in the US tribal culture, whereas, as you will know much better than I do, up in Canada, they would pride themselves of having had history associated with the likes of lacrosse, but even more importantly, betting on lacrosse. So did I glean and gauge a difference here?
I think not necessarily. I mean, there's different types of gaming. If you want to define it by IGRA, there's social gaming, there's class 2 gaming, and there's class 3 gaming. There's always been an element of wager, if you will. But to become structured gaming in the United States, IGRA was a big catalyst to that.
And crucially and critically in this regard, you have acted as the National Indian Gaming Association's executive committee member. On top of that, a special advisor to the executive committee from back 98 to 2002. So what did those particular roles entail?
It was a really critical time for tribal gaming. We were 10 years post-IGRA. Obviously, at that time, there was a number of people or a number of tribes across the country still negotiating compacts. Many were in their first stages of growth and expansions that would continue to happen over the course of the years and still happening. And it was a very busy time, and I think one of the things that was really special to me during that time period at NIGA was to co-chair the Harvard NIGA socioeconomic impact study. It was post 10 years of tribal gaming. It was a glimpse into, what was the impact? How was it going? What was it doing for tribes and their surrounding community? And it taught us, I think, a lot. We knew that gaming was significant. and it was starting to make a change in the socio aspects of the tribal dynamic in the community. But you also had to remember that, 10 years of gaming could not totally reverse the waters of hundreds of years of despair. So where we saw a little bit of shift towards the positive, we knew that there was still much more to overcome. And it was really, I think, eye-opening to me to be able to be a part of that, and the work that Lycka, set out to do to make sure that we take measure of what's happening, both positive and negative, and, and kind of, cast an eye towards the future, for all the tribes.
And perhaps at the risk of stating the obvious, the critical word there is community plus the socio-economic impact. And sometimes it's not forgotten or misunderstood, but I suppose the impact on the community itself throughout history may tend to be sadly neglected. So I'm very glad to hear that the work that you've done and continue doing keeps rectifying that, and I'm sure it's truly appreciated not only throughout the gambling industry, but to your other point, well beyond. Hopefully this is a segue into my next set of questions, because throughout your career, and as I've said, it is illustrious, you're the, at least in my book, the to-go person when it comes to tribal gaming and much more. You have worn numerous consultancy hats, with the likes of the Gaming Strategies Group, and of course these days, as we've already said, you're the founding partner of the Trilogy Group partners, where you advise tribal governments on the likes of economic diversification and gaming assessment. So, would you mind giving us a bit of an insight into these processes? What kind of activities do you guys deploy to improve the plight of the tribal communities?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a true believer in the premise of what the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act brought. And there was, stated purpose, there was the ability to strengthen tribal governments, to promote self-sufficiency, and to spur economic diversification among the tribal communities. And I think that, for me, after years of being in the industry, starting Trilogy was a way to take what I had learned as a business person, what I had learned as a tribal advisor, and to put it to work in the things that I'm very passionate about. And we have the ability through our company, to do work on business-to-business opportunities where tribes are looking for, companies to work with that will help grow the efforts that they have, and companies that they can trust, as well as companies looking to do business with tribes and trying to understand how to navigate that process, and which is not easy. I think that our work in consultancy frames a lot of that and does a lot of business-to-business effort there, as well as, working with, tribes to tell the story of the diversification that they've done, to show examples of it and promote it, because it's important. There's a lot of, public relations, community relations, internal, external, that I think is important to communicate out there about, the benefits of tribal gaming and what it has done. So to the effect that we can help craft those stories, create those relationships, track those positive benefits, that's truly what we try to work on.
And there's no doubt you've been doing an excellent job, if I may put it that way, without trying to sound too patronizing. You told me before the filming, if I may give that away, that you happen to be at home, which I believe is Chandler, Arizona. So let's briefly talk about the Grand Canyon State. And for the record, we're filming right after the Final Four. So yet another feather in Arizona's cap. So in terms of the regulatory regime, and hopefully it will fit into the theme of today's podcast, Arizona, a lot of folks will know, has granted 20 sports betting licenses. 10 of them have gone to the sports franchises, and the other 10 to the Arizona tribes, which I suppose is a very interesting combination in my book. So, how is that setup working out?
A lot of this happened post my time as a director here in Arizona, and obviously I have a lot of respect and relationship with the tribes here. I think it was a bit of a tangled web, if you will. It was difficult to see that not every tribe that wanted to receive a license could receive a license, that there was a limited number of licenses versus the number of tribes here in the state. For myself personally, I was concerned about that because this was an expansion of gaming in the state, and it for the first time changed the exclusive nature of tribal gaming here in the state. So that was a little bit difficult, and not only that, but when the licenses began and the gaming began on sports betting, because there was just a certain number of leagues here, they already knew that they would receive a license. So they were able to gear up, get ready, get to market, and start conducting sports betting. On the other hand, the tribes were waiting to see who would get those few licenses. And so that gave the leagues a kind of a jump start on the tribes and being able to get to market. That was a little bit, I felt, inconvenient, unfair, however you want to put it. But it did make a difference. And, but I look at it as that tribes are still where gaming takes place here in the state of Arizona. And yes, the leagues may have sports betting licenses, but they are where the gaming, facilities are. They offer the full scope of gaming. And so I'm hoping that with that they will not only make up ground from starting behind the 8 ball there, but advance it even further.
I suppose it also clearly demonstrates the resilience of the tribes, not only those that have landed the licenses, but others throughout the state of Arizona. And we will come on to talking about the leagues in a slightly different context in a second, mainly when it comes to some of the recent scandals. But before we get there, and you've already touched upon it, the sports betting licensing took place after your time as the executive director of the Arizona Indian Gaming Association, but I would feel ashamed and I would be remiss in my duties as a host of this podcast if I did not ask you about your time there. So, what were the biggest achievements you'd like to call out from, let's call it the pre-sports betting era in the state of Arizona when you were firmly in charge?
I think there was a few things that, probably stay in my heart of the time here. There was a couple times that, the tribes collectively worked to protect their exclusivity here in the state. There were attempts to, from either the fantasy sports leagues or the racetracks to advance, gaming and challenge that exclusivity. And the tribes who in large part worked very closely together, unified their stance, their position, and their voice, and they made sure that they protected the exclusivity that they had on gaming here in the state. And I think that was important, and it said a lot about what the tribes stand for and how important that this economic engine is to them and their communities, as well as the state at large. One of the things that we did as a result of that effort was to have a statewide communications plan. And that was through radio, TV, billboards. We even wrapped the train that goes through town here with, imagery about the benefits of tribal gaming. And I think that was very significant because, if you talk to people and you said, would you protect the right of the tribes to protect exclusivity? they didn't really know where the money went. They didn't understand necessarily the value. They didn't understand the impact to the communities. And when we shared that information and the recipients of the benefits, came forward and shared their stories, it, I think, really resonated with people, and it made them look at this in a different light. And, that's an important story to tell.
And I would suggest that there are certainly some lessons to learn here for the wider industry, i.e., we might need to get even better at showing the wild world the benefits of the gambling industry. And the other important point that I would call out there is working together, which sadly is not always the case, but I should digress, not really go there. We've talked about Arizona. Let's move on to talking about other, what I would call tribal states. So, because quite a few other states that rely on tribal compacts, not only, but for the purposes of this debate, access to the sports betting market, Connecticut, Nebraska, Washington State, Oregon, and many more. Again, for those who may not be as initiated in these matters, what is the essence of the compact? Somebody would have come across that expression and we go, oh, good Lord, yeah, probably need to learn a bit more about this because I keep hearing it. So what is a compact and how does it work in practice?
Well, and I think that you make a very valid point there, Martin, is that, when you want to come into the industry in the United States and work in tribal gaming, you really should understand that before you go talk to anybody. Every tribe is a government, every state is unique, and those negotiations are government to government negotiations. And that can't be taken lightly, right? So, I think that everywhere you go, you need to understand the framework that compact is driven under. I mean, there could be states that have policy or got, stuff in their constitution that doesn't allow for certain scope of games, and so that has to be changed before it can even be considered into a tribal state compact. And there's a lot of layers in tribal gaming where there's not in commercial gaming. Tribal gaming has 3 layers of regulatory oversight: the tribal regulator, who's the primary regulator, the state, and the federal government. So the dynamics there, state by state, government by government, tribe by tribe, can be very varied. And, it's important to research and know that before you advance any ideas of, maybe wanting to do business or, offering a product. It may not even be allowed. You have to understand what it takes to make that happen.
In other words, please do your homework, be ready, factor in the cultural idiosyncrasies, even more so than you would have under other circumstances. Now, this is really appreciated, tribal compacts, why the game in 101. But Valerie, suppose 3 states keep making headlines these days. 3 states that, well, 2 of them are yet to regulate, and one, namely Florida, has granted exclusive rights to the Seminole tribe to provide sports betting services. So a couple of questions, if I may, and hopefully they make logical sense, because in my book they are intertwined. So do you believe that Florida, or what I would call a Florida precedent, will be replicated elsewhere? And what may, in a similar vein, the future hold for California and Minnesota?
Well, Florida to me is very unique and a bit of a perfect storm there, right? So you have the state government, legislators, the tribe, Department of Interior, all working towards a common objective. And they've identified and supported and advanced a offering there that is very unique to obviously anywhere else in the United States. That's more of an exception than a rule. There's one, tribe that's advancing this. There's only a couple tribes in the state of Florida, and they have all of this, aligned support towards an objective. That's really hard to make happen anywhere else. In a number of the other states, you've got a number of tribes in that state. You have, legislative dynamics or, governors that totally different situations. So Florida is unique in that sense in what will happen there. I can only hope that if it does, move forward as described, that the concept of mobile for tribes may be redefined, but the ability to have all of those players aligned and stakeholders on the same page is very unique.
Totally. And I suppose in the spirit of further education, and you've already touched upon that point, I believe that it's one of the fallacies when the US market gets reported upon as one market. Of course, we've already said that. Nearly 40 individual states have regulated sports betting. Plus, there's tribal gaming. There are states who've regulated online gambling, retail gambling. So it's a multitude of markets. So if there's one lesson, I would suggest there are many more, but one lesson for the audience to take home and munch over, it's the fact that there's no such thing as a harmonized US or single, that's the expression I'm looking for, single US market. That's why folks out there need to be even more diligent and careful when approaching it. Moving on to all things responsible gambling, because ultimately this is at least meant to be a responsible gambling podcast. But I would typically ask my guests, and you've been heavily involved with all things responsible gambling, is what in your view, when it comes to the current state of the Responsible Gambling Union in the United States, what's gone well and where we sort of might have let ourselves a little down?
First I have to say that I am enlightened to see that there's more focus on responsible gaming than there ever has been before. And I think a lot of that has to do, obviously, with the growth that's taking place between, sports betting and that massive growth across the country, the, onset of iGaming and just there's more gaming taking place, and you hear more about it, than I feel ever before. So with that growth has to come the increased growth and focus on responsible gaming. I mean, we can't move forward and advance and expand without also keeping an eye on that as well, because the health of our industry is critical to, the future of it and its perception to people. So I'm glad to see that more people are trying to focus on it. I'm glad to see that, more companies are creating policies and programs with regard to it, as well as, the groups that have gathered together to help promote it. I think that we need to take some lessons from other places, in the European market or where else where the growth went so fast and the responsible gaming efforts didn't keep up with it. And then, there were problems, right? So if we don't learn from those issues and mistakes, then that will be on us.
Amen to that. I can't agree more. Talking about those groups, lately, quite a few of them have cropped up and they seem to be mushrooming. There's ROGA and RGAA, the RG group that the affiliates have formed. So on the one hand, these are totally valuable and badly needed efforts. At the same time, there would be folks out there, I would suggest, that may argue that instead of pulling together, and maybe it's a fool's errand to try to create one super organization that would assemble all the key stakeholders, that will never ever happen. But I suppose, isn't there a risk that instead of pulling together with this many organizations, and we will also come on to talk in the NCPG, as opposed to working more closely together, we're rather pulling apart? Are you getting the same vibes, the same impression, or am I being perhaps a bit too critical?
No, I totally agree with you, Martin. On one hand, you want to say, "Oh, this is great that you're focusing on this," but on the other hand, I just feel like we need a collaborative, cohesive, approach. And when you have so many separate viewpoints and so many different aspects of going towards something, you might lose the strength of the collective. Not only that, but there's the dollars that it takes and the resources that are needed. So when you have groups breaking off to create organizations, do you risk the fact that you're maybe weakening another organization? I don't know, but I'll be interested to see. I would just like to see that, there would be more of a unified effort, and that we don't spread thin the opportunity that we're all trying to achieve.
Yeah, we shall definitely keep a close eye on how all this will unfold. But as you've said, ultimately, we're all in it to do the same thing, which is to protect our patrons and do it in the most sustainable and sensible way possible. Talking about the National Council on Problem Gambling, it is my great honor to serve together with Valerie on NCPG's advisory board. So also bearing in mind what we've just discussed contextually, what do you believe is NCPG's future? What role it should be playing, or it should continue playing, because the NCPG, in my book, still the leading, the best known, and so far also the most efficient problem gambling, or if you will, a responsible gambling organization in this country.
Yeah, absolutely. When I look at it, I kind of compare it to, the tribal gaming associations. We have regional associations throughout the country that speak on the efforts of their tribes, specifically to their tribe. And then you have the national organization that is more global, that brings all of those voices together, is a strong voice. And I think that the National Council does just that. I feel like we have to have that national voice, that's the cumulative voice, the voice that's, known and respected on the Hill, that can go up there and speak to issues and speak to, what's happening out there. And ideally, to me, that, all the other groups kind of feed up through there and they work collaboratively, because it is an important organization. For myself and my partner, Sheila Morago, we're working with the National Council and who has dedicated time to create a tribal advisory council. And, that to me is very important as well. Tribal gaming is a significant portion of gaming in the United States. It's almost 50% of the gaming that takes place here. And, tribes look at healing in a very different light than, other folks look at healing. And, I want to look at, how do we take the impacts and effects of gambling addiction, and assist tribes and their community members with getting through that process, create resources and information to help, that impact along. There's a lot of historic trauma there that has to be addressed, and has to be addressed in an appropriate and culturally sensitive way. So I really am, proud of the National Council for considering that aspect of it, and to focus some time on it to see what we can do to make a difference in that light.
Absolutely. Kudos to Keith White and the team for that and much more. Before I give Valerie 60 seconds to convey her closing messages and very much cement her place in the Safe Bet Show's Hall of Fame that she totally deserves, as I've already said, we're filming right after March Madness, and it's been really mad this year, mainly about Caitlin Clark, who of course got drafted as a lock one number one pick yesterday. Run up into the NHL NBA playoffs, the MLB's just kicked off, so there's a lot of sport going on. At the same time, hopefully this won't turn out to be too controversial, we've witnessed lately several betting related scandals. So Valerie, what is your view on the likes of the issue that's befallen Shohei Ohtani? Shall we agree with the guys that I would that I would call the betting bashing brigade, who argue that the betting regulation is the root cause and is to be blamed for all this? Or would you rather agree with what is my view, that the regulation, it's not great that these things are happening, but the regulation, in my view, has given us the ability to detect these issues and then go and at least try to address them?
Yeah, absolutely, Martin. You know, I feel like there are bad actors that exist out there in many forms. And, you know, from the illegal gambling sites and shops that are out there, which are part of this issue, you know, things are going to happen. And I think you can't paint everything with a broad brush and to say that it's all just because of one thing. You know, you have people that are going to act illegally and irresponsibly no matter what. But I feel that the regulatory framework that we have does help to assist in identifying these issues and to bring them to light. And I think it's important for our industry to continue to support that, to work within that framework, and to eliminate, where we can, the illegal gambling that takes place out there that helps fuel a lot of these bad things that happen that really reflect badly on our industry.
And yet again, we're talking about collaboration, which in my book is critically important to all this. Ladies and gentlemen, we're hitting the home straight. So it may be unfair, but I do it on every single podcast. So Valerie, 60 seconds for you to convey your key messages, if you don't mind.
You know, I think that sports gaming, iGaming, mobile gaming will continue to grow and proliferate in the market. I would like for us not to rush forward with blinders on. Let's be responsible and learn lessons from other markets and protect ours here and at home. And let's have a great, wonderful growth in our industry.
I will be right there with you every single step of the way. Ladies and gentlemen, the fans of the Safe Bet Show, this was the one and only Valerie Spicer, founding partner at Trilogy Group. Great to have had you on the show. My name is Martin Lycka. This has been the latest episode of the Safe Bet Show, and I would like to see you next time.